Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/ProRevenge, where people get revenge on others and lives are getting ruined, guys. And in today's episode, we've got greedy family members, psycho bosses, and shady landlords all getting taught lessons they'll never forget. The stories are super satisfying in this one, so sit back, grab a drink, and remember guys, this voice is only on the DarkFluff YouTube channel. Let's dive in. So a few years ago, I worked in a 24-hour call center. It wasn't a bad job, but I was always getting pushed to night shift. On the other side of the call center was a claims department that only worked Monday to Friday 9 to 5 shift, and I jumped at the chance when a spot opened over there. What a mistake though. Turns out the manager was this older woman who we'll call emotional vampire, who did nothing all day long but try to get you to tell her the worst things that happened to you in order to play Dr. Phil. The woman fed off of and craved these stories, and the 3 other girls that worked there played into it. All day long, there was nothing but drama, trauma stories, gossip. It was so annoying, but I dealt with it by ignoring it the best I could. But even that wasn't good enough for her. One day, she approaches me during my break and she said, "Everyone's sharing their stories, so you need to share your stories." She wanted me to sit with her and unload my childhood trauma, if I had any, and tell her the worst stories of my life. She wanted tearjerkers. I refused to play along because drama bores me. So this woman started this campaign of trying to get me to quit in order to hire somebody more sympathetic to their little circle. Suddenly, all of my work was subpar, I was always late or leaving early, which I wasn't, and the woman was bad-mouthing me to anyone she could think of. If that wasn't bad enough, she also got her 3 little baby vampires to harass me as well. Just nasty comments all day, stuff getting spilled on my desk, my lunches going missing and found in the trash. The list just goes on and on. I'd finally had enough when she screws me out of my raise on my bi-yearly review. I began secretly taking pictures of my desk before and after bathroom breaks, printing out the less than professional emails I was getting from her, and I kept an actual note on my desk from her that said, "We don't want you here anymore." I took it all to my friend in HR along with my notice, as I had found a better paying job anyways. My HR friend said that she would look into it and she was sorry to see me go. On my last day though, emotional vampire just smirks at me as I walked out the door, thinking she'd won. But her smile wasn't nearly as big as mine when my IT friend who worked there sent me a framed copy of her terminated for cause letter a month later as my birthday present. I called my friend in HR asking how things were going. Apparently, emotional vampire tried the same drama routine on my replacement, who didn't play along either, and tried the same get them to quit tactics, not realizing that HR had sent a plant as my replacement to verify my story. Yeah, kudos to HR for investigating and getting that boss out of there. Like a manager pestering people for their personal life stories, trauma, and sob stories no less, and then trying to play Dr. Phil. Like, that's pretty nutso in my opinion. Like, you're using your position of power to do that. Once again, good frickin' riddance, and she should have gotten fired a long time ago. So last year, I moved out of a house that I rented for 5 years with no problems. I always had a good relationship with the landlord. There are 2 relevant bits of background to this story. Number 1. In the UK, where I live, the standard practice when renting a house is to sign a tenancy agreement for a year. At the end of the year, if you want to stay in the house and the landlord's happy with that, you can just do nothing and the tenancy will continue until either the tenant or landlord gives notice. Alternatively, you can sign a new 1-year tenancy agreement each year, which isn't really necessary, but some landlords want it. My landlord wanted me to sign a new tenancy agreement each year, which I thought, fine, whatever. So since I rented the house for 5 years, there were 5 tenancy agreements in total. Number 2. By law, the landlord's required to protect my security deposit. That meant she had to put it into a special kind of account within 30 days of receiving it. The tenant then receives login details for the account so they can check that it's protected and view various info about it. The point of doing this is so the deposit is held by an independent party who can mediate if the landlord and tenant disagree about any deductions. There is a dispute process that the tenant can request, which is free for the tenant to use. So that said, I'd been living in the house for almost 5 years, and I gave notice to end the tenancy because I was buying a house. After I'd given notice, the landlord emails me to ask if I was planning to hire a gardener to ensure that the garden would be returned to the manicured state it was in when I moved in. Now, I thought this was strange because my tenancy agreement explicitly forbade me from doing the sort of things in the garden that would have been necessary to maintain its original state. I wasn't allowed to do anything, not manage shrubs or bushes, anything like that. So all I'd been doing was cutting the grass. Basically, that clause looked like something that the landlord would include if they planned to maintain the garden themselves, except she didn't maintain it while I was living there. In retrospect, it seems that she didn't read her own tenancy agreement properly. I replied to the landlord's email about the garden. I quoted the part of the tenancy agreement that forbade me from doing certain things in the garden, and I expressed my confusion. I asked her to clarify what her expectations were about the state of the garden, given what it said in the tenancy agreement. She didn't reply, but a couple of weeks later, I received an email from her husband telling me that the landlord was anxious about the garden and I should ensure that it's returned to the same state as the start of the tenancy. So I replied to him, and again, I asked for clarification, given the wording of the tenancy agreement. He replied saying that he would have the landlord get back to me herself, which she never did. So without any guidance about the garden, I just did my best with it. My boyfriend, who's an experienced gardener, did the work here, and I just asked him to do what he thought was best. He cut back the bushes, cleared loads of stuff, and I spent a few £100 on having the garden waste removed. I knew that technically I didn't need to do that, but I wanted to do what I could to keep relations between me and the landlord good. Fast forward, and I moved, the tenancy ended, and after not hearing anything from the landlord for a couple of weeks and not getting my deposit back, I emailed the landlord to ask about the deposit. Having ignored my queries about the garden before, she chose this moment to announce that she wanted to deduct £400 from my deposit to carry out work on the garden. What followed was a really time-wasting back-and-forth email in which I pointed out the terms of the tenancy agreement were incompatible with my being able to maintain the original state of the garden, and her just repeating that the garden wasn't returned to her in its original state. In the end, I just suggested that since we couldn't agree about deductions from my deposit, we should use the independent dispute process offered by the company that was holding the deposit. That process needs to be kicked off by the landlord, so I asked her to authorize it. She didn't do that. Instead, she kept wasting my time by sending me emails trying to negotiate an amount to get the garden right, which I wasn't going to entertain. Meanwhile, I couldn't log into the account where my deposit was being held. I contacted the company, and it turns out that my landlord had, quote, accidentally input my email address incorrectly when registering the deposit, which I found very strange because she emailed me successfully dozens of times throughout the time I was living in the house, so she definitely knew my email address. Without being able to log in, I was unable to officially dispute any deductions she was proposing. There is a window of 3 months after the end of tenancy where you can dispute any deductions. After that, you either take what the landlord's willing to return or go to court. Apparently, it's also common for shady landlords to register their tenants' details incorrectly to make it harder for them to recover their deposits in the time frame available for disputes. I had a long back and forth with the deposit company, after which I finally gained access to my deposit account. When I got into it, I looked at the info, and I noticed that the landlord had not protected my deposit until the day after I gave her notice to end the tenancy. That meant she protected my deposit well after the 30-day deadline by which she was supposed to do it by law. There are penalties for landlords that fail to comply with the laws around tenancy deposits. If they break the rules and the tenant takes them to court, they have to return the full deposit, plus between 1 and 3 times the amount of the deposit as compensation. Also, they're not allowed to make any deductions from a tenant's deposit if they haven't complied with the law. So I emailed the landlady a bit more firmly than I had previously. I pointed out that she couldn't make any deductions from my deposit because she hadn't complied with the law. She responds by sending me a quite tantrumy, insulting email and authorizing the return of my full deposit. So yay for the deposit back, but what a bitch insulting me when I had done nothing wrong. I was pissed off by the fact that she tried to rip me off and she wasted hours and hours of my time trying to sort this out. Not to mention the stress, just seeing an email from her in my inbox caused my stomach to flip by this point. This is when things start to get a bit more exciting. As I said above, landlords who don't comply with the law around tenancy deposits have to pay between 1 and 3 times the value of the deposit in compensation, plus return the full deposit if they get taken to court. The documentation from the tenancy deposit scheme proved that she had broken the law. I had already gotten my deposit back, but it was clear that if I took her to court, I would receive a minimum of that amount again. Except, of course, I didn't just have this one tenancy agreement with her. As I mentioned, she had insisted on me signing a new tenancy agreement every year. So I had 5 tenancy agreements in total. I spent a few hours checking the law and going through old emails and documentation. It turns out she failed to protect my deposit correctly in all 5 of the tenancies I had with her. I had a ton of documentation to prove that. That meant if I took her to court, I stand to receive a minimum of not 1 but 5 times the amount of my original deposit, which is well over £6,500. It would cost me a couple of £100 to take her to court, and I was 100% willing to do that. In fact, at this point, I was relishing that prospect. In order to take her to court, I first had to send her a letter before action, in which I set out my complaint against her and I gave her an opportunity to make an offer to avoid going to court. The landlord replies to my letter quite dismissively, basically saying that it was clearly just an admin error that caused her to fail to protect my deposit correctly every single year for 5 years, and she accused me of being motivated by a huge windfall. I reply by email, correcting her various mistaken assumptions and repeating the need for her to make an offer in order to avoid court. After a while, she replied and she offers me £4,000. I told her that the minimum I would accept was a little over £6,500, since that was the minimum I would stand to get in court. After some more back and forth, she agreed, with certain conditions attached, perhaps conditions that she thought I might not be able to fulfill. Things like sending her copies of all the documentation relating to the deposit for previous year's tenancies, but which I was able to do immediately. When the money landed in my bank account, I emailed her. I explained that I would have fully dropped my complaint against her if at any point she offered a sincere apology, which was true, at least up until that final email where she insulted me. I also said that I hope she would deal more fairly and reasonably with future tenants. She didn't reply. Thank goodness I'll never be a tenant again, as I own my own home now. But having spent many years being dicked around by crappy landlords and agents, it was so satisfying to end my renting days with such a satisfying and profitable middle finger. And what a middle finger that was. And the best part was OP's email to the landlord after they got the payout. I wish I could have seen the look on her face. You mean I could have saved £6,500 if I had been a little bit more polite? You've gotta be kidding me. And this is why I always say be nice to people you encounter, because you never know how much time someone has or how far someone's willing to go to spite you. And this next OP tells a wild story about their uncle and greedy family members. Listen to this one. So this isn't my story, but it's the story of a departed Uncle Hadge. Here's some backstory. Back in World War II, my Uncle Hadge was an engineer with the RAF. He rapidly climbed the ranks and he ends up being head engineer at a local base. After the war, he met his wife of 45 years who we'll call Eve. It was a typical post-war relationship without children due to complications. He quickly found a job at our village, a coal mine, known locally as the Pit. He went from engineer to foreman very quickly. The man had a knack for leadership, that's for sure. That said, he, Eve, his sister, and my grandmother often went to Spain for the holidays, at least once a year before they all retired. Now, the unfortunate truth is that my family isn't always nice. My grandmother was his only surviving direct family. Eve, on the other hand, had a very large family, very large. The trouble with large families is that often there's a few bad eggs. In this case, it was quicker to count the good ones. As Hadge would put it, the trouble with eggs is you can only tell the good ones by spinning them quick or dunking them in water. But I don't fancy going to prison. More often than not, Eve's family would drop by and ask to borrow money. Not from Eve, she had none. Hadge had always been industrious, saving as much as he could and only really spending what he had to, other than the holidays, of course. When I hit 18, which is legal drinking age where I live, he took me for my first beer, as my dad worked nights and had to sleep. Neither of us took much notice to the people around us, so we didn't notice Eve's nephew in the corner. He overheard our conversation about Hadge being diagnosed with diabetes. Cue 5 years passing, and I've seen him only a few times, way less than I'd like because of work and him going overseas. I visit my grandparents one day to find my grandmother sobbing, with Uncle Hadge sat on the sofa. Uncle Hadge says to me, "Hey kid, I need to tell you something. Listen up, I've not got long on this wretched planet, but you're not to cry over me. I've been diagnosed with late-stage cancer and I couldn't be happier to be leaving." He says to Gran, "I know you don't want to hear this, but it has to be said. You and yours will be looked after, of course, but you're not gonna tell Eve and her family. I've made up a new will and I want everyone to go to the reading, as I've prepared a little gift for the family." Not too long after that, he passed away. Here's the revenge. We went to the reading as a family like he asked. We'd seen people we've never met, never even heard of, so of course, there were some sullen scowls across the table. The lawyer then says, "Now that we're all here, please watch this video. Hadge has a message for you all." The video plays and it's Hadge from beyond. He says, "Now then, I imagine this will be a shock to most of you, but I had cancer. If you're watching this, I want you to know that some of you have made my last few years pleasant. Others, well, we'll get to you." He then says to my side of the family, "Not one of you came to me asking if I was alright or wanted anything doing. Instead, you asked if I wanted a hand with anything, and for this, I thank you. I've never had anyone do anything for me unless they were my underlings in the RAF, and I didn't aim to start when I found out that I was on my way out. You knew me better than most of my close family. I'll tell you if something's wrong. Good on you." He then goes on and says, "Now then, let's get to the good bit." He then says to Eve's family, "You lot, where do I begin? When I took OP out for his first pint, apparently the walls have ears, and one of you overheard me tell him I had diabetes. Shame you had to say it's a shame it wasn't cancer. I guess you got your wish. The rest of you, whenever you visited me, you asked more often than not if you could borrow money, which is fine. I didn't mind lending it to you, but I did expect to get it back. So here's how this is going to work. I've split my money and I've put it in a trust with my oldest friend, the lawyer. Nobody's getting a thing until Eve pops or clogs, so don't bother asking. Eve can stay in the house that I worked my ass off for until she either dies or has to go into care for any reason. The house is not to be sold until after she dies. Lazy as she is, she's still my wife. Once she dies, the house is to be sold at a reasonable price to the next owners, and the money from that is to be added to the total of my finances and then split with the family. Eve's is her own, and she can do with it what she wants, other than add it to my total. The lawyer has been left instructions on this. Now here's how it's gonna be split. Number 1, if you borrowed money from me and you paid it back, you'll get a fair share based on your age at the time of my death. Number 2, if you haven't repaid the money you borrowed, you can still get a cut minus what you owe me. For some of you, I hope you know I'm laughing at your squirming from beyond the grave. Number 3, to my only living family, you'll get the lion's share of whatever's there to be done with what you will. If you're not wanting to keep it, the lawyer has been paid for any services you may require. Trust him, he's a good lad, and he saved my ass on more than one occasion in the war. Lastly, OP, you've been a great help the last couple of weeks. I called you unfairly at 3 a.m. to help me out of the bath after finally giving up on getting myself out. Sorry you had to see that. You didn't have to help the next day with decorating either. If you weren't already on your career path, you'd make a fine tradesman. You'll receive a cut to be determined by the near future's events. Use it how you will. To the rest of you, I'm utterly effing disgusted to have known you. I mentioned earlier that Eve can live in the house until she dies, or she's put into residential care. If either of these happens, nobody is to live in that house. I don't want anyone I don't trust in there. Now quit your crying and go about your lives. Hadge. Now, as you can imagine, people kicked up a stink about this. We nodded to the lawyer and left. Shortly after the funeral, Eve went into a retirement home with her own money, and she had more than enough to keep her afloat for many more years. A couple of months down the line, we all get called back to the lawyer's office. Again, we're directed to watch a video. It's Uncle Hadge, and he says, I'm not surprised that this video has been played. Some of you don't follow orders. If you're watching this, it means that someone I don't trust was found to be living in my house. I don't care who it is. Lawyer has instructions of what to do next. But for the sake of his voice and sanity, whoever was found in the house against my wishes is now stricken from the will entirely. If the others feel that they want to share their money with you, that's their loss. You will not get a penny from me. As it turns out, my cousin and her family, as in her on and off boyfriend, 2 kids, and a dog, had moved into the house after convincing Eve to move out because they needed the house. What they hadn't counted on is the nosy neighbors. Hadge had asked them to watch the house, and if they saw anyone new there or any signs of moving, to report to the lawyer for updates. In return, they would get a cut of the money he had. They're good people. The lesson here is don't screw with a war vet. Revenge served beyond the grave, and what a beautiful revenge that was. And not to mention a brilliant execution from Uncle Raj. Like, a death in the family always brings out the worst family members, and for Uncle Raj to have a video that basically said, screw you, to all the greedy people showing up hoping to get a cut is, again, absolutely brilliant. And this person shares their comment, and they say, I wish my grandma's brother had thought of something like this. When he died, his also late husband's family swooped in, where they demanded over 70% of the inheritance for some odd reason. Otherwise, they would sue my family. As my family was still grieving, they simply did as told, and they gave them 70% of the inheritance. People can be absolutely disgusting. So this happened just about a year ago. I worked for a mid-sized law firm as the IT manager. We were a small group: myself, the IT director, a help desk guy, and a system admin. We all put in many hours over and above the normal 40-hour work week we were paid, but we never complained. One week, we were hit with ransomware and we ended up working 55 hours straight. We were all on call 24/7, and not a week went by that we didn't get a call on the weekend from the firm administrator. She would call on the weekend asking for somebody to drive to one of our remote offices and set up a monitor at 8 p.m. on a Sunday. Again, we grit our teeth, bit our tongues, and we went along with it. Never a single complaint. One afternoon, the IT director comes to my office to talk about bringing in a company to assist with some security issues we'd found during the ransomware attack. Since it was such a difficult time, I agreed. So the company came in and immediately began talking about taking over all the IT functions. We pumped the brakes and we told them we're only interested in the security side. The security company then requested a private meeting with the firm administrator. Fast forward 2 months and the security company now has half our servers on their cloud network, and they'll be taking all the servers to their network in the next couple of months. We began having real issues with the network, servers becoming unreachable, software not working properly, and the firm administrator blamed us, the local IT group. We took the flak for the security company's screw-up. After a while, my IT director had enough and she turns in her resignation. I was next in line for her position and I'd been doing most of her work for her anyways. So the day came when they would announce the new IT director position. I was called into the admin's office and she sat me down and told me the firm would be going in a different direction, and they were going to be going with an outside company to handle all their IT issues moving forward. I was told that they would be firing all the employees immediately, but they asked me to stay on for 2 weeks to help the transition, i.e., train the new company on how to do my job. Apparently, a totally different company swooped in and sold her on their company. Basically, all the internal IT and the security company were let go. I agreed to stay on the next 2 weeks. After the meeting, I watched as the firm admin and security walked out my team. I immediately went to our internal wiki, help documents that I set up, and I removed every single document that myself or my team put on there. We had a new software installed a few weeks prior, and I was the only one who knew how to service it and how it was set up. The instructions were in the wiki. There was also a new office being set up the following Monday. I'd been working every day for a month to get everything in line for it, including setting up all the PCs with specialized software. I removed the password entries in our password manager for those PCs. I then cleaned out my desk, handed my desk plant to some friends, said goodbye, and left, without telling the firm administrator. The next morning, around 9 a.m., I sent my resignation to the firm administrator. She was left completely empty-handed as the new company was set to train with me that day and they weren't ready to take over full control. This is when the firm admin calls me, begging me to come back, and she said she would bring me on as the IT director where I could oversee the outside company. I politely declined. She then called the old IT director and the fired employees, begging for one of us to come in to help. We all declined. I get phone calls from time to time from employees that are still there. They say the network's always down, the user accounts are frequently deleted without any reason given, and the new office has just been set up, which is nearly a year later. As for the software that only I knew about, they've hired 2 people to manage it, and from what I'm told, it's frequently down and rarely works right. So the moral of the story is employers, treat your IT department with respect. If you don't need them, they're doing a great job, and the grass is rarely ever greener. Well said, OP, and honestly, I love stories like this, where bosses literally fire a team that they think is unnecessary, only to have to beg them to come back. And guys, with all the stories I've read, there's one thing that people need to learn, and that's to never mess with the IT guy. Case in point. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r/ProRevenge. Guys, I know it's been a while, and I hope you enjoyed the lineup today. The stories were so satisfying, weren't they? And if you missed yesterday's episode on the channel, it's an r/entitled people episode where smug Karens actually think they own the hotels. And seriously, some of these people are way over the top. The episode's wild. So if you missed it, go check it out. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.